find I'm so excited I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement only a free man can feel. A free man at the start of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope.
Joseph Campbell once wrote, "One problem with Jehovah, as it used to say in the old Christian Gnostic texts, is that he forgot he was a metaphor. He thought he was a fact. And when he said, 'I am God,' a voice was heard to say, 'You are mistaken, Samael,' which means blind God, blind to the infinite light of which he is a local historical manifestation. This is known as the blasphemy of Jehovah, that he thought he was God." Sapient words indeed, my beloved true seekers, and things have been going downhill since Yaldi-Baldi's great fascist proclamation.
In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move.
Our Lord God basically caused a light spark substance spill from the pleroma into the Gulf coasts of reality. God forgot he was a metaphor, a symbol, a reflection of something greater. And so have we. So have we most of the time. We have sinned in ignorance by our ignorance, spilling our oily egos into the waters of our natural divinity, believing ourselves to be the ultimate realities, string together facts that require little modification, and the main actors of the world, which Shakespeare called the great theater of fools.
The whole world revolves around me.
But if we realize that we are metaphors for something beyond us and within us, we will become watery and clean, fluid enough to flow back into the seas of our ambrosial potential, even as an ocean of the true God fills our chest, our sacred hearts, and our parched imagination that has been calling for our moist attention ever since we were taught as children to follow our dreams, but then were handed someone else's dreams. And metaphor is one of the dilithium crystals that fuels mythology, that history before history, that interior secret language of the individual spirit and collective benign dream of humanity.
As William Blake wrote, the cutworm forgives the cloud.
But let me just quote the late, great Colonel Sanders, who said, "I'm too drunk to taste this chicken."
Mythology holds voiceless but soul disembroiling truths and lessons for personal growth that rarely fall into logical structures. Mythology creates a reference point between ourselves and our culture that can help us facilitate or adjust our own psychic well-being. As June Singer wrote in her touching book, A Gnostic Book of Hours, myths are two expressions of our inner selves, revealed cryptically in image, symbol, and metaphor. They are something like dreams. Rationally, they may not ring true, but in a psychological sense, they express people's inner processes through the use of ingenious devices that conceal what must be concealed and reveal what must be revealed.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
Or as the great Heinrich Zimmer said, the best things can't be told. They are transcendent, inexpressible truths. The second best are misunderstood, and they are myths, which are metaphoric attempts to point the way towards the first. And the third best have to do with history, science, biography, and, yes, religion. The only kind of talking that can be understood is this last kind. When you want to talk about the first kind, that which can be said, You use the third kind as communicating to the first, but people read it as referring to the third directly. The image is no longer transparent to the transcendent.
If you don't mind my saying so, this conversation is getting a little strange.
And that is one of our goals here at Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, as it always has been, and that is to become transparent to the transcendent. Or as Mary Magdalene says in the Nag Hammadi Library's Dialogue of the Savior, there is but one saying I will speak to the Lord concerning the mystery of truth. In this we have taken our stand, and to the cosmic we are now transparent. We have our goal. We have taken our stand. We are the Gnostics, the lovers of the esoterica, and the Dionysian freethinkers. We are the sons and daughters of the bridal chamber, the undocumented laborers of all dimensional Arizonas, and we rage against heaven.
God! Bing, 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 bing! Well, it was nice to meet you, God. Thank you for the Grand Canyon, and good luck with the apocalypse. Oh, and by the way, you suck!
Welcome with kindness and love to the virtual Alexandria, broadcast through the GodAboveGod.com. I am Abraxas, also only a metaphor, a mythology, a dream of you. I am you. And you're probably got a frackin' good idea, as they would say aboard the Battlestar Galactica, of our topic today. But it's far, far more. We've spoken volumes about mythology on Aeon Byte, but not as much as we should about making it a practical part of your life, besides the obvious write your own gospel and live your own myth algorithm you hear every week, which if you follow and embrace should be enough in the end, even if the end is your social insanity crucifixion by the powers and principalities, or facing a marketing Mara as he rises from the lakes of your deepest insecurities.
You're not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. You're not your fucking khakis.
But there is always more, and there is never enough Akamoth here at the virtual Alexandria. And our astral guest on this approximately Saturday, May 22nd, the year of our Demiurge 2010, will certainly guide you through the labyrinths of myths, teaching how to use each of its golden threads, symbolism, dreams, archetypes, images, and of course metaphor. And this is the kind, sage-like, and estimable Lawrence Caruana. He visited the virtual Alexandria on Aeon Byte number 95 to discuss his work, The Hidden Passion, a novel of the Gnostic Christ based on the Nag Hammadi text, which along with Kai Longfellow's The Secret Magdalene is head above dandruff shoulders, the best fictional account of the Gnostic Jesus, or any Jesus for that matter, although they might have to defer to Kazanzaki's The Last Temptation of Christ.
Then the pain came back, and the voices. They call me by name. Jesus.
You're sure it's God? You're sure it's not the devil?
I'm not sure.
Lawrence in this Eternal Now discusses his newest messianic child, Enter Through the Image, the ancient image language of myth, art, and dreams. It's a richly scholarly, elegant, and eclectic book that certainly would make Campbell, Eliade, Zimmer, Hume, and the other frontiersmen of mythology proud. Caruana's book takes you on a surreal yet intellectual journey into the empowering possibilities of mythology and its golden strands, touching upon areas that haven't been really mined, like the realized prophetic art of Salvador Dali, the dream worlds of Descartes that revealed to him another I am he never knew about, and few knew that he knew about it.
Sorry, Quaid. Your whole life is just a dream.
Enter Through the Image also reveals the psycho-spiritual crevices of Buddhism and Hinduism, the philosophical subconscious of Hermann Hesse, and much more. It's as a complete book on mythology and esoteric anthropology as you're gonna get, my beloved truth seekers. And better yet, being a humble student of Gnosticism and gentleman caller of Sophia, Lawrence also focuses much on the perennial heretics. After all, few can deny the Gnostics were one of the greatest jihadists of mythology in all of history. And that includes even fundagelicals, whose greatest fear is that someone, somewhere out there, might be having a good time. Or earthquake-predicting imams, secretly wanting to squeeze boobies with their goat milk-stained hands.
There is most definitely a hell. And you're all going to go there when you die.
After all, the Gnostics reinterpret oppressive Bronze Age theologies and fables to quarry for virtuous veracities, express their artistic vision of creation in grandiose cosmological space operas, and created fields of allegory to decipher the human condition. But more importantly, as Lawrence proposes, the Gnostics actually left behind coded rituals, meditations, and exercises in their myths that can induce altered states of consciousness and release an individual's godlike latency. And you will be privy to some of these tools, my beloved truth seekers. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is.
From now on, we are enemies, you and I, because you choose for your instrument a boastful, lustful, smutty, infantile boy, and give me for reward only the ability to recognize the incarnation.
The first clue, which Lawrence and so many others have taken as one of their main Gnostic commandments, resides in a passage from the Gospel of Philip that states, "Truth did not come into the world naked. It came in types and images. The world will not receive truth in any other way. There is a rebirth and an image of rebirth. It is certainly necessary to be born again through the image. Which one? Resurrection. One must enter through the image into the truth." Of course, resurrection and Gnosticism must happen before we die, as we become living saviors of all forms of goodness and Kalis of all forms of ignorance.
I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
And the Gospel of Philip has other hints that point through entering through the image, like this one. At present time, we have the manifest things of creation. We say, the strong who are held in high regard are great people, and the weak who are despised are the obscure. Contrast the manifest things of truth. They are weak and despised, while the hidden things are strong and held in high regard. The mysteries of truth are revealed, though in type and image. Or this passage, "But truth brought names into existence in the world for our sakes, because it is not possible to learn truth without these names. Truth is one single thing. It is many things for our sakes, to teach about this one thing in love through many things." Or this last one from the Good News of Phil, "Truth, which existed since the beginning, is sown everywhere, and many see it being sown, but few are the ones who see it being reaped."
It doesn't matter if they believe us. Sooner or later, the truth's gonna come out. The truth is out of fashion.
I hope you're getting the gist, a small salty taste of the light sperm you're about to swallow from our interview with Lawrence. And the promise for unleashing the power of myth, you may ask? Well, Plato did say, "Those who practice myth have given their lives to true philosophy and will grasp the hidden meaning of all things." So sit back and leave mundane reality for an eternity or two. Make sure you've got some fuel in your cup, because coffee is for closers. Light up some plant substance as a sacrifice. A nice gitane, since Lawrence lives in France. Some sage to scare away evil spirits that might get you preggers if you're a dame. Or maybe just light us some Thai red laced with Iceland volcanic ash, because fire is the devil's only friend, and one way or another we're gonna burn. Whether it's in the punishing furnaces of our own betraying egos, or the freeing alchemical state of rubedo, we're gonna burn. We're all gonna burn.
Why don't you burn in hell?
We rage against heaven, even as we wholly dive into Hades. We become transparent to the transcendental, even as Jehovah refuses to admit he's nothing but a metaphor, and a bad one at that. And before I say enough of my drivel, make sure to visit Lawrence's homepage at lcaruana.com, and that is lcaruana.com. You'll encounter plenty of dope beyond our interview on entering through the image and about his work as a visionary artist. Lawrence is certainly a Renaissance dude and Gnosticoi eternal, my beloved truth seekers. But enough of my drivel. Let us enter through the image and into the truth, which some have simply called Gnosis.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we have the pleasure of having back Lawrence Caruana to discuss his new book, Enter Through the Image, the Ancient Image Language of Myth, Art, and Dreams. How are you doing, Lawrence?
Fine. Thank you very much, Miguel. It's great to be back on the program.
Great to have you back, indeed. So, Lawrence, what made you decide to write such an eclectic, psycho-spiritual, and deeply scholarly book following the fictional story of the Gnostic Jesus and the Hidden Passion? It seems quite of a sort of a jump, even though Gnosticism is such, it encompasses all these things. Could it have been indeed that one passage from the Gospel of Philip?
Definitely, the passage in question, Enter Through the Image, was the déclic, as they say in French, which is the moment of epiphany which started me moving in this direction. Basically, I had read the Gospel of Philip at around the age of 21 or 22, and that passage in particular, it just stuck in my mind to the point that I wrote it down on a card and I put it above my easel where I paint. And it stayed with me for years and years. Basically, the experience, Enter Through the Image, is what eventually happened to me, that I could say. And as a result, I decided to write a book about it. So the book is called Enter Through the Image, and it basically describes how art, myth, and dreams can all come together as a means of thinking through images to arrive finally at this moment where the image becomes transparent to its source, and that source is the sacred or the divine. It becomes a moment of epiphany. So I wanted to write a book about that, and I did. And I should mention, though, that I spent about a good 10 years writing that book, Enter Through the Image. And it went through many editings. I submitted it to publishers. They said I should change it in this way and that way. And in between two edits, I just started the novel, The Hidden Passion, which we've talked about before on this program. And The Hidden Passion then became a way for me to release all this energy which was getting frustrated by Enter Through the Image, which is a scholarly book. And so I was able to write the novel. And then I came back to Enter Through the Image, refreshed, renewed, and was able to then complete that book, which is the book that you have in your hands right now. So it was quite a journey to arrive here, but it was a profitable journey because one book influenced the other, and there's a real dynamic between the two books, I could say.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the image or entering through the image makes you be able to see the transcendental. It was Joseph Campbell who said, mythology is basically becoming transparent to the transcendental. You use the word epiphany a lot in your book. Epiphany really come from the Greek of when God enters you?
I would agree with that, absolutely. Yeah, or enthusiasm is another way of describing it, that definitely you have a moment where your eyes open and you see things differently. And that which is before you suddenly... the way I would describe it is that an image becomes a symbol, and a symbol is obviously something that is not just itself, but points beyond itself to something greater. So there's that moment where the door is open and you can actually see something greater beyond what's in front of you.
Yeah, it reminds me, and you quote him too, William Blake's famous quote, what does it say? If the doors of perception were cleansed, we would see everything as it is, infinite.
Infinite, exactly.
So that is really the reward of truly entering the image and understanding the mythology, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. That otherwise we're suffocated, if you wish. That if we live in a mundane world without any openings to the sacred, then we have no escape from where we are. So we definitely need the mythology. We need the imagery as doorways out of our confining existence.
And you talk also. You say that a symbol, it really is defined as having both a mundane and sacred experience at once. Isn't that what a symbol is?
Yeah. I mean, take the example of a door. You know, obviously in our mundane existence, we need doors to move from one room to another. But the moment you stop to see the door in its functional aspect and you meditate upon the door and you see it as a symbol, of course, it acquires a greater meaning. And then it becomes the sacred doorway. It becomes that which opens out to a greater experience. It becomes the doorway to the sacred, you know. Gnosticism is filled with the most beautiful metaphors. One example being the mirror, you know, that Christ is a mirror and that we see ourselves in Christ or moving in both directions. Christ or the sacred sees itself in us, you know. So the Gnosticism will take lots of very simple images like a mirror or a doorway and expand them in such a way that they reveal a greater dimension to our existence. And that's what this is really all about.
You also write that myths are an arrangement of images in time.
Mm-hmm.
And we basically have two types of myth, the cosmogenic and hero myth, which we all know about, and it's basically, it really comes down to the ancient viewing of the sun, doesn't it? The sun comes up, goes down, battles the darkness, and then the sun comes up, and then we just basically sort of added all these stories to it.
Yeah, this is one view of the origins of myth, if you want, that the journey of the sun as it goes through the sky in the daytime and then it travels under the earth and it has this underworld passage in the nighttime and then is reborn in the morning, that becomes the model for the hero. And often the male hero is associated with the sun. The female hero, on the other hand, is associated very often with the moon, because the moon cycles, it cycles in the sense of every night we see it move, but it has the waxing and the waning over the course of 28 days. So the waxing and waning of the moon then becomes an image for the heroine. And a lot of myths have these cosmological foundations, if you want. I look at that in my book, but I would say that there's more to mythology than just that, you know, that there's much more to what a myth can be. But that's one of the foundations of mythology, without a doubt.
Before we get into more of the practical aspects of mythology, it seems that you discuss what you call the One. And the One is this ultimately beyond the sun, beyond not the God above God, but the primeval God before God, you know?
Exactly.
It anchors everything together. Can you tell us a little bit about the One?
Sure. Okay.
And I don't mean Obama either. Or Neo.
Or Neo. It's funny that you mentioned the sun, because I think we have this misconception of ancient Egypt that they worshipped the sun. And of course, the sun for them was just an image. And in the same way that Christ could be an image for us within our culture, or the Buddha in Buddhism. So really what they were worshipping was the unity, the source of all life and light, which manifests itself in the form of the sun. And so many different religions around the world then have ultimately this idea that the sacred is a unity. Within Western culture, I would say one of the roots or foundations, one of the oldest sources of writing that we have within Greek culture are the Orphic fragments. And within the Orphics, they pose the question for the first time, how can I have all things one, but each one separate? So this idea of the one started in Greek, I can't say it started in Greek culture, it was definitely present within Greek culture. The more you look for it, the more you find it, that all the pre-Socratic philosophers, for example, were constantly talking about the one. Often the fragments are mistranslated, actually, and this emphasis is lost. But then, without a doubt, in Gnosticism, in Plotinus, this idea of the one resurfaces very clearly. And then after Neoplatonism, it kind of goes underground once again. We don't see God as a unity. It's not really described in that fashion, But Gnosticism, and I'm afraid Gnostic scholars are also responsible for this, but the Gnostic texts, if you read them, they're constantly referring back to the sacred as a unity, And the entire structure of the Apocryphon of John is based on this idea of describing the cosmos as these emanations outward from this divine unity, and how in fact, the divine unity is surrounded by images of itself, mirrored images of itself. And this extends from the upper eons down into the lower eons to us, and we ourselves, through the divine spark, mirror the divine one to itself. We have a particle of its light, So Gnosticism gives us this beautiful image or cosmology of how all things are one. The question that was first posed by the Orphic fragments, how may I have all things one and each one separate? Gnosticism is one of the perhaps most beautiful answers that's given to that question. And every religion, in a sense, offers possible answers to that eternal question.
So you think a lot of the Gnostic myths, and then obviously you have the Sethian rituals, and you write a lot about it in the Hidden Passion, like the 5 seals, baptism, even the sacraments, were rituals in which, do you think the Gnostics reenacted the myth, or found a way to go up that ladder?
Yeah, found a way to go up the ladder, what's called the visionary ascent. There are texts such as Allogenes, which clearly what's happening in the text is that this guy is having a vision, and he's having a vision of ascending through the eons. And often the journey begins through the lower eons, and many Gnostic texts are dedicated to how do we traverse the gateways of the lower eons, And then finally, if we succeed, the vision continues. And we can enter into the upper eons, and we have then a vision of the glory and the light and the angels who will receive us in the upper eons. So not only do you have texts describing the visionary ascent, but the Gospel of the Egyptians, for example, suggests that there were texts which were written out loud, which were spoken out loud, to guide the person being initiated in the Gnostic baptism through the experience, and what I'm calling a visionary experience. The whole purpose of a sacrament, of course, is to initiate you into a certain sacred experience. What I describe in my novel is the 5 seals, which I describe as being the chrism, the baptism, the Eucharist, and so on. Each of these sacraments, the bridal chamber being the most important, are there to ultimately initiate you into a momentary experience of the sacred, to give you that moment of epiphany. And I would argue that's the real aim and function of the Gnostic texts ultimately. They're not just works of literature in which proto-theologians were amusing themselves in how to put together and reinterpret Old Testament fragments and New Testament fragments. It wasn't just a game for them of recreating and playing with and subverting texts, you know. I think they actually had a sincere purpose in mind, and that was to induce a revelation in what they were doing.
Basically, that is what is Gnosis. That is Gnosis itself, is to be able to, I think it's Gnosis of Bless, what's called Gnosis. In fact, yeah, I got it from your book too. It was says to see beyond the visible.
Yeah, exactly. That, or Gnostic, the blessed, to go from what is hidden to the end of what is visible. Yeah, that the Gnostics have this idea of the pre-existent images, the images which exist in the upper eons. And everything which exists down here is just a poor fabrication or copy by Yaltabaoth, a poor imitation of what exists in the upper eons. So, coming back to this idea of to enter through the image, you know, the idea is that you move from what is physical and concrete, but also moving in time and what I would describe as finite, to move beyond what we see in our perception to something which is higher. And what is higher, it has a quality of stillness, it has a quality of perfection, it's infused with light, and all of those images, again, descriptions, they come from Gnosticism, that the upper eons are described as the stillness and the silence and the beauty and the calm, and not a world of distraction or fleeting images, which is what we get down here. You know, images of temptation, images of bodily pleasure or pain or suffering, that we're freed from all of these lower images and we rise up through them to the higher images which exist in the upper eons. That's the point.
Yeah, and before we get more into the rituals, I love what you wrote in your book, and it's kind of that terrifying awe that you get when you look at the vine. But you write, the mythic path is nothing less than a grand temporal reflection of the One as it creates, periodically saves, and finally destroys that cosmos which mirrors its own movements in eternity. That's kind of scary, Lawrence, isn't it? There's a giant eye looking at us, basically, and we are the eye too, right?
Exactly, yeah. That was written at a moment of epiphany. I had the privilege while writing this book of being able to examine mythologies, not just the Christian or the Gnostic, but different mythologies, and seeing them from a much greater perspective. And but thanks to Gnosticism, Gnosticism and the idea of unity became a key. But basically, yeah, that myth is the unfolding of events in time. And so we basically model through myths history or the unfoldment of time, from the creation to the savior who then performs some great deed in the middle of history, to the conclusion, the apocalypse, the destruction. And this entire mythic movement is just the means in which the sacred reflects upon itself, but reflects upon itself through these images unfolding in time. If you see it that way, of course you have to be one with the sacred in eternity, which is to say removed from this unfoldment of time, removed from linear time or cyclic time or whatever. But once you step outside of this drama that we are caught within, you begin to see your life and the entire unfoldment of the history of which you are participating as simply a grand reflection of the One moving through time. And it's a beautiful image, I think, a beautiful understanding of the cosmos, if you can arrive there. I only arrived there for a few seconds and it all collapses. But
I'm that way too when I'm writing or meditating. Those glimpses, we only get glimpses. It's exactly. Terrible. But going into more of the ritualistic side, which I'm sure a lot of listeners by now are going, oh, okay, well, you guys talk about all this beautiful mythology, but what does it do for me? One of the rituals I liked in your book, and you're talking about that actually this happens in India, in Hinduism, is, for example, you stare, let's say, at an image of Shiva, and you look at the images and holding the drum, the hand beckoning, what each symbol thinks, and what the worshipper tries to do is to erase the barrier between the worshipper and the worshipped.
Exactly.
So in India, they do believe in entering through the myth, and entering through the image. So that takes the what? Meditation, prayer. What would you say?
I would say there are many ways, but meditation or contemplation is definitely one of the most important ways. You know, that within the Indian tradition, there's something called puja, which is to just worship the image through standard movements. But the deeper way of worshiping an image is through ekagrata, which is called concentration on a fixed point. And so you literally sit before the image, you gaze upon it, and you try to become what the image is showing you. And a god, an image of a god, is showing you one that is in a sacred state, is perfectly stilled, is perfectly at one with the all. And so if you can see yourself in that image, if it can become a sacred mirror, then you yourself will become that, you know, and the famous Hindu saying, thou art that. You will become the image before you, which is an image of a god. So it basically is a mirror to the divine within yourself. And once you see your own face within the statue, and you see that truly within yourself you are divine, the statue no longer exists. It was just something to get you to that point. And now the statue is destroyed and you are one with it. And this is called the moment of samadhi in the Hindu tradition, where it's a union with the divine, where there's no space or separation between you and the divine. And the statue also then no longer exists as something to separate you from the divine. You're one with it as well. So definitely enter through the image, which is a Gnostic expression, seems to express the very same idea that you have here in Hindu philosophy and ways of viewing works of art.
And so I guess this also begs the question. We know these ancient sects and these ancient people who probably understood what mythology was much better than we did. Like you write, you know, Aristotle, by the time of Aristotle, he was already saying, mythology's not that important, let's move on, and the Neoplatonists. But they understood, they had the rituals. We have evidence that the Hindus and Eastern people use something called the Soma. The mystery schools use something called the Ergo. These entheogens to alter our state of consciousness and aid us. Do we have any evidence about the Gnostics participating in this, or any of the ancient Christians?
Evidence is a tricky word. Let's sidestep for the moment. I'll come back to it, what we can call evidence. Okay. And let's look at what the entheogenic experience is described as. And what fascinates me, because I belong to different communities. I belong to the Gnostic community, but I also belong to the psychedelic community. And they don't communicate very much. When you're in the psychedelic community, and if they describe an entheogenic experience, they will end up using a lot of language that is the language of Gnosticism without even being aware of it. Okay, and to give you examples, that the entheogenic experience is basically one where you become aware that the world that you have participated in all this time is in fact illusory in some manner, that you have the sensation of stepping outside of the normal measures of time that you were always within, because during the entheogenic experience, time slows down, or it speeds up, or it just comes to a standstill. So you break out of the structures of time and space as well. Your perception of space alters radically, until finally you have the sensation of experiencing the sacred directly. That's a good entheogenic experience, by the way. You experience the sacred directly, which is what a Gnostic would just naturally call gnosis. You know through experience the sacred. But the psychedelic experience goes on to say, yes, it is like experiencing the sacred as a unity, that I felt oneness with the divine and oneness with all things. I felt the barriers break down. And that, in fact, these barriers, I had the sensation that they were imposed upon me in my previous view of the world, as if from somewhere which I don't know. And now I'm seeing the truth for the first time. That's the psychedelic experience. Now, the way it compares with Gnosticism, there's many, many parallels. So, obviously, to me, the language of Gnosticism is the finest language we have to describe the entheogenic experience. Is there any direct evidence of the Gnostics using entheogens? I would say no. I've done a lot of research, and the closest I've come is a very obscure text within the Gnostic canon, the second book of Jude. It's a very difficult book to find. It's been out of print and so on. It finally exists now in a PDF form on the internet. If you do a lot of searching, you can find it. And the second book of Jude, there is a passage in the 45th chapter where Jesus initiates his disciples into 3 baptisms. And during these 3 baptisms, it's described in detail what he does. And a lot of classic substances are mentioned. Okay, I'll give you just one example from the fire baptism. There's 3 baptisms: the water baptism, the fire baptism, and the spirit baptism. So in the fire baptism, it says, he, Jesus, offered up incense. He laid there juniper and myrrh and frankincense and mastic resin and nard, casdelathandos, terebinth and balsam, and he crowned them with verbena plant, and he placed the anemone plant in their mouths, and he placed the chrysanthemum plant in their 2 hands, and he placed knotgrass under their feet. Now, obviously, and it goes on. This is just one passage, but there's a whole list of different substances which Jesus is using to initiate his disciples into the baptism. Now, I've spent a lot of time looking through all of these different substances. Juniper, which is mentioned, is actually a psychoactive substance, But it also depends on the way you view these substances, because our understanding of psychoactives is changing radically. That basically there are so many plants which contain psychoactive substances like DMT, but when we ingest them, they lose their efficacy because we have enzymes which break them down. So the hallucinogenic properties do not enter the brain. But recently we've discovered that if you combine this plant with another plant, you get what is called an ayahuasca or an ayahuasca analog. And the other plant will allow the hallucinogenic plant to then not be broken down by the body's enzymes and enter into the body and into the brain and have its hallucinogenic effect. Now, these ayahuasca analogs, as they're called, which are drunk, the latest understanding is that there are things called changas, and that the same thing can happen not just in something that we drink, but something that we inhale, like an incense. So that if you combine 2 plants in an incense and inhale them, that one will allow the tryptamine, the DMT, the hallucinogenic compound to actually enter past the brain-blood barrier into the brain. The other one, which allows it, does not allow the enzymes to break it down, basically. So you have now a whole huge pharmacopoeia of possibilities of which plants can actually be psychoactive, So definitely, out of all the plants that were available to the Gnostics in the ancient world, there are many which could have been psychoactive. I'll just switch channels for a moment and give you the most convincing answer which I've found to that question. Was there an entheogen within Christianity? And I think the most convincing answer I've found is that the holy anointing oil, which is mentioned in Exodus 30:22, that Moses was told to take cinnamon and myrrh and cassia and olive oil and calamus and combine these 5 into the holy anointing oil. And the high priest was then to be not just anointed, but bathed with this mixture of 5 substances. Now, scholars have definitely come to the conclusion that calamus, first of all, calamus by itself can be a psychoactive substance, but calamus is probably a mistranslation, and that the Hebrew word is cannabosm, and cannabosm is literally a fragrant hemp. So the word cannabis is actually etymologically related to cannabosm, and probably this holy anointing oil did not contain calamus, it contained cannabis. So what the high priest was actually bathing himself in and probably digesting as well was cannabis oil, which is commonly known as hashish. This becomes very important because the Messiah or the Christos is the anointed one, and he's specifically anointed with this holy oil. So it's very strange that if we trace back what the holy oil of the anointed one is in the Old Testament, it could very well contain cannabis. I find that fascinating. But that's about as close as we'll come to ever getting any kind of evidence. Well, I won't say it's impossible, but I'm just saying at the present I haven't found convincing solid evidence of the fact that the Gnostics were using entheogenic substances.
And what do you think when the Gnostics or other ancients had negative entheogenic experiences? And I guess it might have been expressed as paranoia, cosmic conspiracies, and all that. Was that what the Gnostics felt when they felt trapped in this world or saw archons and all that?
Well, no, it's true that within the psychedelic community...
a bad trip.
It's called a bad trip, right?
Let's not get too intellectual here.
But what is a bad trip? That a bad trip basically is that the substance that you've taken into your body, probably a tryptamine, is replacing the serotonin in your neurotransmitters. It's not replacing them, but supplementing them, so that your thoughts have now accelerated. Okay, you suffer from what's called accelerated thinking, and the experienced psychonaut will try to navigate through this space where his thoughts are accelerated. It's very typical when you're inexperienced that you will feel panic and fear, and what happens is basically the hyper thinking creates paranoia, creates the idea that there's a cosmic conspiracy, and you have the feeling that you are being influenced or brainwashed by malevolent powers, or that you're trapped within a cosmic machine in which there's no exit. The language I'm using here is the language of the psychedelic community, but obviously, the Gnostics, when they described the cosmos as the creation of the archons with Yaldabaoth, the lion-headed serpent, as their chief archon, that they're experiencing the same thing, which is to say that they feel that they are trapped with no exit. But I will say that Gnosticism then does give you, the divine spark. It gives you the means to escape. But they make it quite clear that it's not easy, that you try to rise past the archons and they can throw you down, and you become trapped from one existence to the next within the Gnostic scheme of things. So I have no doubt that, again, that the most articulate image or myth to describe the entheogenic experience is offered by Gnosticism, both in its positive aspect, which I've described as a divine unity, experience of divine unity, and in its negative aspect of where we feel trapped and there's no way out, So that's where Gnosticism and entheogens, I think, cross over in a really beautiful and marvelous way.
Yeah, and obviously altered states of consciousness can happen through various stimuli other than entheogens. Meditation,
exactly. Meditation.
Art, of course, contemplation, Plato, obviously, through Socrates, believed that dialectics themselves could alter your consciousness. So there's a myriad of other ways, and one of them, of course, is dreams. How do you see dreams playing into all of this?
Playing into that, it's a bit difficult. The way I describe dreams in my book is that I am fascinated in my book by the idea of an image language, that since the time of Plato, we have come to value reason and the word and language, which allows us to then think through words using reason. But obviously in mythology, what's happening is that you're thinking through images. And I believe there's such a thing as an image language. We just have to rediscover the grammar of it, the logic, its own internal way of connecting one image to the next so that we can think through them. And dreams, for me, are that exactly, is that at night we revert back to this more ancient way of thinking, which is to say we think through images. And thinking through images can consist of dramatizing your own life, which is what you see within the dream, but not just dramatizing it, mythologizing it. That I think it's fascinating that a good dream, not all dreams, but a good dream, has a mythic structure, that you inevitably will go from a situation that you know and you're comfortable with to like Campbell in his hero's journey, you'll go into this underworld, you go into this place of adventure, and there you will undergo a kind of ordeal or an experience which is a bit beyond anything that you've experienced before. And at the nadir of that, according to Campbell, the hero myth is a death and rebirth, or an epiphany, or a marriage with the goddess. So there's a definite threshold is being crossed. And dreams, then, we use those same mythic structures to portray your life to you in a mythic manner. And so I believe that dreams are ultimately very important as a way for us to think about our own lives, not rationally, not through reason, but rather to reflect upon our lives in a more ancient way. And I would just take a quote from a man who I respect very much, who said that myth is the eternal prefiguration of a human life. And I love that expression, that definition of myth. Myth is the eternal prefiguration of a human life. So once we look at myths in that way, and once we look at our own dreams, we can then begin to compare our lives. We can then search out what is my myth. And the way you're going to find what your life myth is by looking at your dreams, by remembering your dreams and seeing what your dreams are telling you, because they're portraying your life to you in images or in mythic forms. So I definitely delve deeply into this subject in my book. I've just covered the surface in what I'm describing. But that's the role that dreams play within the ancient image language.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, as you write, the whole hero's journey or the god's journey, whether it's Inanna or Orpheus going into the underworld, us falling into the dream world, the sun going down beneath the horizon, what we're entering is a world where, in essence, we are facing our ancient memories and archetypes, aren't we? Or our fears, or anything we need to deal with. As Jung said, we have to face the unconscious, or else the shadow will rise. And what's interesting is that I find is that I think one of the most powerful myths in Gnosticism is the fall of Sophia, because she falls from the pleroma, but she doesn't fall to meet anything. she actually falls to create all of these things. It's a different twist, don't you see? She creates all the memories and the bad things and everything. So
that is beautiful. That definitely the myth of the fall of Sophia, I think it's something which entered into Gnosticism from a much more ancient source. And I don't think the Gnostics themselves ever really came to terms with it, that they tried to then cross over this myth with Christianity and say, oh, but we have a savior. His name is Jesus Christ. And, well, he was crucified in order to redeem this fallen Sophia from what she did. But you're taking mythic fragments, crossing them over, and trying to kind of justify what results. But I agree with you. The myth of Sophia's fall just stands by itself as an amazing myth. As you said, that we don't have to view it negatively. We actually can turn it around and view it positively. And I actually believe that the ultimate source for the Sophia myth is the goddess, the goddess who created the cosmos. And of course, this was a beautiful, positive image. The goddess created the cosmos. We find this in ancient cultures. But over time, with Bronze Age cultures and monotheism and patristic theology and the males coming in, we had to subvert it, change it around, and make it a negative thing. So that became Sophia's act of creating the cosmos. The goddess's act of creating the cosmos became something negative, and so she fell. So I agree with you that Gnosticism took that myth and played with it in very many different interesting ways, but that the myth itself is still there in its ancient form, somehow buried, within the Gnostic texts, within all its beauty and all its profundity. The duality of the Sophia figure is part of all that, I believe.
Yeah, and when you read different texts, you always get a different Sophia. There's one Sophia who rules over Hades, one who is redeemed, one who splits herself up into three forms. So the Gnostics did, and this kind of ties in what you say in your book, which, Nietzsche, Campbell, I think Heinrich Zimmer said that don't get stuck and just start using myths, but it's great to mix and match myths, right? To create, to advance your own language, your own mythic image.
Yeah, although I would argue that doing it, there's another quote in the book by Hermann Hesse where he says, suddenly I became sickened by this idea of a mosaic game playing with the mythologies of past cultures. If you do it as a game, an intellectual exercise, it won't work. But if you have a genuine revelation, and you definitely seek some means of expressing that revelation, you'll then take whatever is at hand. You'll take this mythic fragment, that mythic fragment. You'll take anything to try and express what you've realized. So I believe personally that the Gnostics were very much like that they were taking Christianity, Judaism, ancient Greek thought, the Egyptian Hermeticism, everything that they could get their hands on, and putting it all together to try to express this fundamental revelation that they had. And in the end, they came up with something which is actually quite original, that we can look at all these different sources to Gnosticism, but it's unique, that they managed to put the pieces together in a way that no one would have ever been able to predict, and they dynamically function with each other in a marvelous way, So yeah, playing with fragments of mythologies, that's definitely what every religion does. Christianity came from Judaism, and so each one makes their own improvement or alteration or perversion of the one which came before, and that's finding out those different mechanisms, those way that images move from one culture to another. A lot of the book, the final chapters of my book, is based on finding those mechanisms.
And to end, in your opinion, what are some of the great myths of our modern times? Or what myths have touched you? Mythologisms, as you call them.
Mythologisms, yeah. I would have to say that I don't believe we're at a point in history where we are creating mythology. And that's hard for me to admit as an artist. I'm a painter. I'm supposed to be creative. I believe that rather we are in a period of history where so many fragments from the past are coalescing in new and different ways. And that's what gives our time its richness. One example I'll give you is what I call the tribal revival or neo-tribalism, that I see it as definitely necessary that our culture has to go back to the tribal way of viewing the world. And we are doing it, not just within our mythology, but within our art and music. And, to give an example, here in Europe, we have the Boom Festival every 2 years where basically 30,000 people go to an isolated spot around a lake and recreate a new society. It's like the Burning Man.
My cousins go to, my cousins in Portugal go there every year.
But, this is what the Essenes did, and I believe the Gnostics as well, is that they left the city centers, which were corrupt, and they went out to the desert and created a new society, a society which, if you're going to base your society on love and compassion and unity, you can't do that in the city. So you have to go out and recreate a new society in the wilderness. And so I'm pleased that we are doing that today in these neo-tribal gatherings, that we are creating new societies out in the wilderness, which is exactly what the Gnostics and the Essenes and John the Baptist and so on were doing 2,000 years ago. So maybe we will give birth to a new religion. I don't know. But I think we're at the stage where all the pieces are coming together, and the myth will be born. But I'm sorry, I can't tell you what it is, not right now. So I'm looking for...
But what about in art, Lawrence? Do you see anything? For example, I guess the obvious one would be The Matrix. Probably a lot of people consider it the greatest reworking of myth of our times because it crystallizes technology and Gnosticism and the Jesus Christ mythos so well. Or somebody might say Star Wars, which basically just threw all these myths together. Joseph Campbell loved Star Wars, and Lucas even admitted he based it on Campbell's work. Do you see anything in art? Do you see that are great mythologies?
Well, I belong to, when you say art, leaving beside cinema and going into painting, I belong to what's called the visionary art movement. And definitely visionary art. Alex Gray is perhaps the best known in the USA, Robert Venosa, Martina Hoffman. There are what we think of as contemporary art, which is the bullshit that we see in the museums. This has nothing to do with that. This is very much a popular art, And visionary art is something that you can find on the internet. It's starting to find it in galleries, but really it's something that exists just among the artists themselves. They're portraying their visions because they have to, and other people are latching on to this because they see it as important, So visionary art is definitely something that's important to me. It's what I do as an artist. And it ties in with Gnosticism in many ways, because in the same way that the Gnostics pursued their visions, there are artists today who are pursuing their visions, and they're representing it in art. So I think that's very important.
All right, Lawrence. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you very much for coming back on Aeon Byte and giving us some of your sapience.
Oh, and I wanted to say happy 4th anniversary. It's a real accomplishment.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I don't know how I made it this far. I don't know why society allows me to do it, but why ask why, right? I'm just
right. We all bow down and say thank you very much.
And enter through the image.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you very much, and good luck with your new book.
Pleasure talking with you.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Lawrence Caruana on his new book, Enter Through the Image, the ancient image language of myth, art, and dreams. And some techniques you can use to make mythology work to liberate yourself from the Arkham asylum this universe is. run by the maddest of all beings, Jehovah and his white coat angels. Again, for more information on Lawrence, please visit his website, lcaruana.cam. That is lcaruana.cam. And don't overlook his enkindling novel, The Hidden Passion. In fact, if you go to my blog, you'll find a link to Lawrence's The Gnostic Q, the most complete selection of Gnostic quotes that he used as a thematic framework for his kick-arse fiction work. Another factor about mythology, and Lawrence definitely touched upon this, whether you've noticed it or not, is that your life is truly an expression of ancient mythologies. Even if you go beyond psychology and science and horny fraternities, you will find that your relationships, goals, life challenges, and dreams can already be found structurally in some mythology. Reflect on this and look carefully, my beloved truth seekers, because if you find the mythology you are mirroring, maybe some section of the Odyssey or the Bhagavad Gita, you can find both the lessons and how your situation is going to end, and perhaps how to change it. It may sound strange, but like I've said before, the great masters didn't just leave behind their teachings, they left the very paths we are meant to take if we are going to enjoy any type of growth or evolution or ultimate liberation. Whether it's Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi, Orpheus, Hercules, Moses, or even Billy Jack. Again, quoting from the Gospel of Phil, it is not possible for anyone to see anything of the things that actually exist unless he becomes like them. This is not the way with man in the world. He sees the sun without being a sun, and he sees the heaven and the earth and all other things, but he is not these things. This is quite in keeping with the truth, but you saw something of that place, and you became those things. You saw the Spirit, you became Spirit. You saw Christ, you became Christ. You saw the Father, you shall become Father. So in this place you see everything and do not see yourself, but in that place you do see yourself, and what you see you shall become. Or as the treatise of resurrection says, now if we are manifest in this world wearing him, we are that one's beams, and we are embraced by him until our setting, that is to say, our death in this life. We are drawn to heaven by him, like beams by the sun, not being restrained by anything. This is a spiritual resurrection, which swallows up the psychic in the same way as the fleshly. And lastly, let me repeat that Plato said, those who practice myth have given their lives to true philosophy and will grasp the hidden meaning of all things. So figure what myth you're in right now, but don't forget you can still live your own myth and write your own gospel, like Simon Magus, St. Paul, Valentinus, Muhammad, Krishna, and so many others, even if they were never historical. But unlike Jehovah, we have to remember that we aren't truly historical either, but metaphors. And then we'll truly be free, transparent to the transcendental. We have taken our stand. We are the Gnostics. Divided we stand, together we rise. And let me do the Heilig thing and remind you that you should be foraging through the Aeon Byte store, which houses the greatest resource center for Gnosticism, the esoterica, free thought, and ancient religion on the internets. The best and the brightest, the bold and the blasphemous are waiting for you to download them. And it certainly helps continue this Atom venture. And you can certainly help by spreading the word, joining our Facebook and Twitter dominions, donating the money you are going to use to fund that genital waxing appointment, signing on to our mailing list or subscribing to our blog, and whatever else you can think of that might give me a little exposure to the less than transcendental aspects out there. Even letting me know what's on your mind and heart is welcome. The Gnostic revival cannot last forever, and eventually orthodoxy will crush us like prostitute ants. In the meantime, and while we can, let's shine on like the moon and the stars and the sun. And unfortunately, that means sometimes appeasing Mammon to an extent. I didn't write the rules, but I worked very hard at reprogramming the Matrix, my beloved truth seekers. Either way, blessed be thou, O seed of Seth, for keeping my black heart company in the virtual Alexandria, where Hypatia eternally awaits to be rescued from the angry Christian mob, and the echoes of a faith almost forgotten whispers to you that you can be more than you've allowed yourself to be. You are legend. You are indeed myth. You are a metaphor for something so much greater. You don't need to believe this. You don't need to accept this. You just need to know. I am, and I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.cam. The road is ended. The song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved true seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. And although everything under the sun is a tune, and the sun is eclipsed by the moon, I'd like to end with a tune by my friend and Gnosticoi, Errol Eichsel. And the song is Toad's Tongue Master. Hello and goodbye as always.
Bye.